Hey, hi. We're live and we're alive. Hi, Lynn. How are you?
Hey, good.
Well, we've got some friends joining us here shortly. And as y'all roll in, I know that we're like a few minutes early here, but we've got a poll that we'd love for y'all to fill out. You can clickety click on that. And then in the chat, we've got a check-in question. And the check-in question here is, what makes you feel supported? And feel free to do with that question whatever you like. And I see some of y'all, I think, are clicking on the poll here. If you should, oh, no, you know what? You're not yet, because there we go. Now you'll see the poll. Um, and so it's just basically who's here. We're curious to know who's in the room. Where do you work? Where do you work? Lynn, what makes you feel supported? I'm putting you on the spot here.
I was just starting to write in the chat, so I'll say it. Somebody's saying to me, "Ooh, wow, tell me more." When
Mm,
I'm starting to like rant or just say something, and I need to be heard. So,
I love that. What makes me feel supported? Like cuddles. Like my friends when they're my some I'm kind of I've heard this distinction that some people are dogs and they want
yeah.
scratches and everything all the time. That's me. Some people are more cats, which is like maybe sometimes depends, and then some people are birds, which is like I'll come to you. And I'm kind of a dog, so just cuddles, just hugs, and being in closeness, physical closeness. It's something I've really missed during the pandemic. So
Yeah.
just when
In,
folks put an arm around me, I feel real supported.
in our family, we call that pause on, pause off. People, the different love languages and stuff. But I totally relate to that.
I love that. I love that. Well, welcome, friends new and old. And by old, I don't mean how many years you have been on this earth, but just how long we've known each other. I'm glad to see some of you, some familiar names in the chat here, and we welcome you and invite you to share in the chat what makes you feel supported. In terms of our poll, it's about 60% independent consultants. We've got public and charter school counselors, some private school counselors. We've got one CBO counselor, looks like, a few teachers or principals, and a few teachers or parents. I listed teacher twice. I apologize. That was my bad. It was supposed to just be parent in the last one. But yeah, we're glad you're here. So we're going to start with just some quick context setting and some announcements. We'll introduce ourselves, and then we're going to get right into it. We're going to talk about vulnerability, something called the vulnerability loop, and I'll explain that when we get to it. And then Lynn's going to talk and do like kind of a mini course, as it were, on trimming and cutting. It's real practical. It's very tactical, and other things that rhyme with ickle. And you can enjoy it with an icicle. And then I'm going to share what I call my pharmacist approach, which is like, how do I quick diagnose what an essay needs or what I think it needs, and then point students to resources. I've got a whole bunch of resources that I'll point to. I don't have time to go through all of them, so just a heads up. There will be things that I look and you're like, "Oh, what's that over there?" And I'm like, "Sorry, we're out of time." But and then Lynn's going to do a little bit about working with parents and what are some tips, things that she's learned along the way. And then we'll do just a quick PSA for a course that we're going to be kind of co-leading coming up soon. And yeah, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. So that's the order of events, as it were. So happy Black History Month, just to start off. It is February. One of my favorite quotes from Mr. Barack Obama is this one. I'll put it in the chat. Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. And in version 2 of this webinar, I'm curious, like, what is the change that you seek? And that would probably be a whole separate webinar. We could spend a lot of time talking about that, but I'd be curious to know, from folks, and feel free to put this in the chat if you want, what is something that you're calling in terms of change in 2022? If access and equity work is on your list of things to do, I want to put on your radar, if it isn't already, a really cool organization. And I just put it into the chat. You can click on it if you want. It's the Institute for Anti-Racist Education. Ashley and Brittany are two really strong co-founders who really give some amazing resources. One of my favorite resources they put together is from the Center for Racial Justice. And I'm doing double duty here where I'm putting the links in at the same time as I'm talking, which, some people don't recommend doing. It's like texting and driving kind of, hopefully not as bad, but it's kind of like it. But here's a great set of resources. That's Black History Month Resource Guide for Educators and Families. A ton of links. And then last year, maybe some of you were on this session, we did a session on 40 ways that counselors can help bring more equity to the college admission process. So you can take a look here. You'll see things like a podcast I did a little while back with Marie Bigham of Accept. There's a White Anti-Racist Accountability mini course that's through the same organization that I just mentioned. A 21-day racial equity habit building challenge, if that's something that's important to you. And then if you are interested in just doing some great volunteer work, here's a list that Erica Copeland, who is the Matchlighters director here at College Essay Guy, put together. It's 100 different organizations that are looking for help. And so if you're looking to give some of your time this year, look at all this. Here's the opportunity. And, there's a link for like, how do you sign up to work with them? So all that and a whole bunch more, a bunch of ideas, stuff that we've been working on this year. And this will change. Like we'll probably post more ideas as we work on new things. So it'll become like 50 plus ways that you can help bring more equity to the college admission process. Let me stop sharing my screen for just a moment. Actually, no, I don't have to do that because there are other things that I want to talk to you about. And I'm going to show you exactly where they are on the College Essay Guy website. So another thing that we have coming up that we're excited to share with y'all. So if you go to collegeessayguy.com and you click this little counselors button, it's good sometimes to show folks where things are to find them again. You'll see a bunch of resources, email templates for counselors, public and charter school counselors hub. You'll also see a link to training programs that I have coming up. One of the ones that's coming up this weekend, there's one this Saturday and there's one next Saturday. And this one in particular is one on financial aid. Amanda Miller is an amazing brain on all things financial aid related. And she's going to walk counselors through this isn't like your basic, what is the FAFSA? This is more of like how the FAFSA is changing. How do you bullet point things in your mind? So when students ask, where do I find scholarships? You can give them a quick answer. What do you do about divorced parents and financial aid opportunities for undocumented students? Some of those more niche questions. She's got answers for those things. A lot of resources, including how to assess a student's financial aid profile and give them the resource they need in under 15 minutes. So she spent a lot of time. One of Amanda's, core values, if I may say so, I think I can say this for her, is like efficiency and processes, but also empathy. She's really good at, she's just got such a heart for students in this work. So, and for counselors. So she's doing a session this Saturday. You can sign up. We'll share the link to that. Thanks, Ashley, for putting that up. We'd love to see some of y'all on that. I'll be kind of co-hosting. I'll be playing Andy Richter to her Conan O'Brien, as it were. I think that's a politically correct, okay thing to say. I don't think either of them have been canceled, so I think that's okay. I think that's it. I think that's all I want to say. I want to kick it to you, Lynn, to just give a little bit of context and say who you are and what you're about. So, ladies and gentlemen, Lynn Hawks.
Hey, everyone. It's so great to be here. I work for College Essay Guy as a college essay consultant, and I also have my own business success story. I'm also a young adult author and have a whole writing life. And prior to that, I was a high school English teacher, a curriculum designer, worked for years running programs for gifted youth through the Duke University Talent Identification Program. So had a lot of experience working with parents in that way and training teachers. So this is so cool that I get to work with Ethan and do one of my total loves, which is talking shop with other educators, counselors, and figuring out how do we solve these rocket science problems of, being educators and consultants and mentors to our students.
Yay. And I'm so glad to be here. What I was sharing earlier today when we did this webinar was last year, Lynn took the advanced course that I taught. And when she was asking questions and sharing ideas, I was like, ooh, Lynn should teach this course. And so here we are 8 months later, co-leading the course. So thanks for being here. So let's get into vulnerability. Let's just jump in. That's a very Ethan transition where let's just get vulnerable. But I want to offer a practical resource that I use with students, talk to you about how I use it, and then I want to demonstrate it here with Lynn, who's going to play my guinea pig. We did it. I talked about it in the earlier session, and then tonight I emailed Lynn a few hours ago. I was like, hey, can we meet before? Because I think we could do it as an exercise. And Lynn's like, sure. And so Lynn knows 50% what we're going to do right now. So I just want to name that and say thank you for just kind of jumping in here with me.
Sure.
Okay. So here's the resource I'm going to share. Actually, let me set it up. I was in a counseling program This was like 9 years ago, and I was co-counseling somebody, and he was having trouble meeting friends and making friends at parties. And I was like, well, what kind of questions are you asking? And he was like, well, like, what do you do for a living? And he named some others. And I was like, I think you need some better questions. K, we'll call him K. That's his first letter of his name. And he said, okay. And I was like, well, let's generate a list. We put a Google Doc together, and it was questions to ask strangers at parties. And we shared this Google Doc and added some more. I went through all these authentic relating games and stuff. And I decided, this would be kind of a cool resource for college essays. So I posted it as a blog. And fun fact, if you Google the phrase interesting questions, it pops up on the front page of Google and led to like hundreds of thousands of views on our website. So this is the list of 100 brave and interesting questions. If you haven't seen it, here it is. So we're going to play kind of a game. And this is a very like Ethan game to play, because it's like type 2 fun was what my friend Duncan would call it. Type 1 fun is like you're having fun in the moment. And type 2 fun is like you're not necessarily having fun, but you're looking back and you're like, okay, yeah, I guess that was worth it. So I think this is like more like type 2 fun. So it's maybe not fun in the moment, but we'll see. So what I want to do, Lynn, is I want to just imagine that we are in a counselor-student relationship, and I'll be the counselor and you be the student. And I'm going to just sort of walk you through this exercise together, and we'll spend maybe two minutes on it, maybe 3 minutes. And then I'm going to kind of pop meta and speak to you, dear counselors, about what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And then I want to offer like a contextual framework for this thing that I'm calling the vulnerability loop. So Lynn, hey, thanks for being in this session with me.
Sure.
So what I'm doing right now, I'm going to pop meta for just a second. I'm scanning this list of questions because what I'd love to do with you, Lynn, now I'm speaking to you directly, is I'd love to just play a game where we just take this list of questions and we just take turns asking each other questions that we think might be interesting, that we might be curious about with one another. And I'll go first. I'm just going to pick a random question from here, and you answer it in whatever way you want. And if you don't want to answer this question, you say pass, and I'll pick another one.
Okay.
Yeah. And the purpose of this is to just honestly just get to know each other a little bit better. I'm not looking for anything. You don't have to be vulnerable or anything. I'm just looking to like let you get to know me better and me get to know you better. Side note to those of you watching and listening right now, this is literally what I'll say to students is like, I just want to get to know you better. Also, second side note, this is totally the exercise I use when we're stumped and can't find a topic. And I'm just like, I don't know what else to do. I'll just pop into this. So, all right, Lynn, here is the question that I'm curious about with you. And remember, you have the option to pass if you don't want to answer this question. Okay, this is the one I'm drawn to. What did your father teach you?
Oh, wow. My dad has taught me to never give up. He is like one of the most focused, laser focused Virgos in the world. And I'm a Virgo. And maybe, to a point where we both need to kind of get off the horse and stop. But also it's like when I feel down, I'm like, all right, make a bullet point list. Let's go. Like I watched my dad do that for years, and he's 80 and he is still going strong like that. He hasn't changed at all. So
can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah.
What's great about being a Virgo and what's hard about being a Virgo?
Oh,
so,
well,
like superpower kryptonite.
Well, Virgos think they're perfect. So there's the first problem. No, I mean, we're very organized and perfectionistic, but then there's this constant cassette in your head, like the loop that's like telling you that you suck all the time. So because you never meet the standards. Like, so it's great because you get a lot done and you achieve a lot, but then you're just like, yeah. So we make, I don't know. Anyway, I could keep going. I'm going to stop.
You're great. You're great. I just want to say, like, when I felt you the most was when you said that, but we suck all the time. So as a fellow Virgo, I get that sort of like dichotomy of like, yeah, I'm real productive and I can like put things in order. But there's also this like, almost like, here's what I'm projecting is like a sense of like, it's not quite enough or it's not quite right. Is it something like that?
Yeah. It's like not knowing when to turn it off and to just relax in there's such a futuristic side to, I don't know if this is Virgo as much as just personality and like, yeah, you're always planning. So
Yeah.
like it just
Yeah, it's great in relationships too, especially with if your partner, and I'm being sarcastic, of course, but yeah, it annoys the heck out of my partner when I do
mine too. Yeah.
that. Okay. So, pausing for just a second, and what I'm going to ask you to do, Lynn, in just a second is just like to pick a question and ask me. And meanwhile, as you're looking at the questions, and you'll find the link in the chat if you don't have it, I want to just get meta for a second with folks listening. And I want to say, like, the thing that I did with Lynn is I just like super listened. I just was like being present with what she was sharing with me. And I was also kind of trying to, and this is like going to be kind of 101 for some of y'all. I was trying to just feel into like get her world a little bit. And I shared specifically, I used this question stem of like when I felt you most was ... And when I felt Lynn most was the I sucked part. And I tried to share a little bit of my own, weakness and where I kind of let it get in there and be like, yeah, I know what that feels like. And I also asked for consent. I was like, hey, I think it's kind of like this. And I didn't say, oh, it's like this. I was like, I think it's like this. Is that what it's like for you? And then I just like paused and like Lynn shared, what she shared. And let me just actually pause and ask you for a second, Lynn. I know this is like a weird thing to do, but like, what was it like to hear me sort of do that projection around like, is it kind of like this? Like, what was it like hearing
Well,
that?
I
Remember?
I just wrote that down because I think that's really cool you did that. I didn't notice you were doing it, but I felt very comfortable hearing it. I think I tend to just story tell back at people, but what you did was check in and say, is it like this for you? Not assuming that your story was identical to mine or your feeling, which I thought was really, now that you're repeating that back, I noticed it. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I like
yeah.
that. I mean, I felt good with that.
Cool, 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 cool. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like I'm asking for consent. Like I'm like, hey, do
Mhm.
we have shared reality in a larger sense is like impossible, but I'm kind of going like, are we on the same page here? And then hearing you say that, I go, the thing that I was thinking was true is like maybe true. And so it does this thing of like, kind of maybe locking us in a little more.
Mhm.
Um, you want to do it? You got a question for me?
Yeah, I like the one about what's the best gift you ever received, if you want to answer that.
That's a hard one. I'm feel so I'm just want to name that I'm feeling self-conscious right now because of time. And I'm like, oh, I need to answer this fast, but I also am trying to like model this vulnerability thing. And so I need to like release pressure on myself to do that.
Would
um,
another word besides best be okay? Like,
oh yeah. What's
something like a neat, a cool, an interesting gift that sticks with
yeah.
you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hmm. Yeah, give me a second. I think what's coming up for me is like time. I know this is like super abstract, but I think about my favorite gifts were when I'm thinking of my friend Kelly, for example. Whew, that caught me off guard. I'm not trying to model tears here. I just was thought about my friend Kelly who passed away last year from cancer,
Mm.
and I got to spend some time with her right before she passed. And whew, what a gift! Like what a gift that was. So I think like actually, I'm thinking about my love languages. That sort of that shared that quality time with her was really really special to me, and that was such a gift. So that's what comes to mind for me.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I wonder, that it's bringing up for me hearing that, like, I've had this thing in my head of treating time differently because, as I was saying before, the Virgo tries to organize it. And just hearing you say, like, the gift of time, which I was not ready for because I was thinking of you were going to say a physical gift. And have you always, like, is that an epiphany for you recently, or you've always thought of time like a gift?
It actually was like because I think of my love language as being something like touch, which I mentioned early on, or like acts of service, and time is actually a huge one for me. And I just had that moment, that like insight moment of like, oh yeah, actually there are moments where that quality time is such a big one. I'm speaking if y'all some of y'all know the love languages, but I'm talking about that great book and system of thinking about love languages. But yeah, I think it was an insight. Thanks for naming that because I think I didn't realize that until you said it. So anyway, we could keep going and keep playing this, and maybe counselors will be like, "Oh, this is interesting." But the thing I want to pause, and thanks for your question and for your beautiful listening and the reflection. the thing that I want to offer as a frame for this is there's this idea, and I want to just call out this book, The Culture Code, which I recommend, Daniel Coyle. It's The Secrets of Highly Successful Groups. I've been looking into like how do you create a great organization? And I'm thinking about College Essay Guy as we expand, we have more coaches and a full-time team coming on board. Like, how do we create that spirit of connectivity? We have a pretty good sense of it. How do we do it even better? And one of the ways that we do it is through this vulnerable sharing. And, a lot of people think of vulnerability as this touchy-feely thing. And it can be that, but it's also just saying like, hey, I have weaknesses too. And it's something that's like, and this is going to be like preaching to the choir moment. It's that currency of like saying to students, like, I'm willing to go out. I'm going to ask you to go out on the skinny limb, but I'm willing to go out on the skinny limb a little bit too, and maybe bounce up and down on it a few times. And the main thing that I want to point out in terms of like the specifics of what's happening, and this is where the vulnerability loop comes in. And again, I've got the author's name that I'll share as a follow-up. And it looks like this. So person A sends a signal for vulnerability. Okay. So someone says, hey, I am here willing to be vulnerable, or I'm being vulnerable. And then person B detects this signal. And then person B responds by signaling their own vulnerability. And that's the important moment, right? Where there's like a moment where, Lynn shares, for example, I sometimes feel like I suck at everything. And then I sense, ooh, here's a moment when Lynn's being vulnerable. And I have a choice here. And I can kind of like go, and fast forward over it or sweep it under the rug. Or I can actually like pause and name it and like recognize it. And there are a few moves, as it were, that I can do there. One is just sharing impact. And for example, I said to Lynn, I really felt you most when just to be like, hey, I heard that thing that you just said. I want you to know that I saw you and I heard you. So I call this like the I see you moment. And we can do this in essays too. When students are vulnerable, getting to that moment of like, thanks for sharing this. Just a quick Google Doc comment. I hear you. I got you. And then it goes back and forth, right? Person B responds by signaling their own vulnerability. Now, I just want you to know that I'm not saying in this session that every time a student shares something vulnerable, you need to then go. I'm not saying everybody needs to go back and therefore share a whole story about that's being vulnerable. But just know that that is like, for me, that's, I think, the crucial moment of when we can share back, okay, here's the way that impacted me. Or, yeah, here's how this lands for me. Or, there are lots of different ways of saying that. Because then the thing it does back, the other person detects, oh, wait, this is a safe space. And then it creates a new norm, right? This is what helps create that psychological safety. Again, for some of y'all, I think that this is going to be kind of like, yes, this is something that I naturally or intuitively do. But I think that there's that moment, and I think I'm bringing this up too, if I'm being really honest, is that I sometimes think I miss that moment. That there is the vulnerable thing, and I recognize it intellectually, and then I'm like, oh yeah, let's move on to the da-da-da. But like actually just slowing down and pausing and being like, hey, I just want to say like, I'm sorry, or like, that sounds like it was really hard. Again, something that many of you probably do, but I'm kind of putting it in my brain to like, when are those moments when that's happening? And can I just take a moment to share impact or just pause and acknowledge it? It's something that I'm working on actively. So that's some vulnerability stuff. Quick, sharp transition to a whole different topic, which is like cutting or editing essays. Lynn, over to you.
And while I'm screen sharing, prepping, there's a cool question about a topic that came up from this. I don't know if we have time for that, but let me go ahead and find my slides. All right. So hopefully,
Ashley, real quick, Ashley, our squares are kind of large here, which is good for people seeing our faces, but it ended up getting kind of over folks, like over the slide deck. Will you make our little squares smaller? And just so y'all know, we're going to kind of shrink, but you'll hear our voices fine. And it'll just make it easier for you to be able to read Lynn's text here. All right, Lynn, take it away.
So I'm going to talk about some skill stuff with the cutting part of essay coaching. I'm so glad Ethan set it up with vulnerability and talking about storytelling, because that is so crucial to come before what I'm talking about. I'm an author in my other life, and I've been faced with things as I cut books, whether I'm writing curriculum for teachers or young adult novels. Sometimes I've had to cut 20,000 words. So as I was doing this, I started asking myself, well, how do I help my students? Because when I was an English teacher, we didn't really have time to do this, to get down to the sort of micro editing. And if I can get my students to be vulnerable and hold forth and tell some great stories, then when it comes close to game time, when they have to submit the essay, how can I help them cut words, see the essence versus, the fluff. By the way, sometimes we have to cut really cool stuff, as you probably have been through. Basically, how can I create an author's crash course in editing? So I've made these slides here, which I think you could use as your own templates in your mind. If you're thinking about how you could model this for students, you could kind of riff off of what I've done as you think about this for yourself. My students have told me, "Whoa, I didn't know like you could cut this many words. Now I'm always looking for extras. This is kind of fun." So what I've taught them is basically overwrite, then underwrite, is I kind of repeat to them. You got to know what to cut and how to cut. So I kind of do a quick mini lesson with them that they then keep replicating. Usually we don't do this until the end. And I threw up the November image here just to kind of signify like close to the deadline. Maybe it's a few weeks, a few days before that we really start to get serious about it. So that's kind of how I handle it. But up until that point, I am the broken record. I'm like, generate, overwrite to underwrite, and they don't really know what I'm talking about at this point. But they will later when I model for them. Because, and I have to say again, back to what Ethan was saying about vulnerability, my students will be vulnerable with me when I'm really listening to their stories, but also I really believe in their writing. So I always try to find 5 things to celebrate. Like I nerd out on their drafts. I'm like, "Oh, wow, please replicate that, phrase or sentence of voice. You see how voicey you got there? I love that specific detail. Oh, that's a really cool simile. Oh, I love how you've been honest and authentic." So they have to see those positive comments, right? Before we start like hacking away, right? But in other words, I try to help them, and this is a whole other conversation, but Ethan has a lot of great resources about storytelling gold, like essence object exercise and, 21 details. So I'm working with them, get the cinematic detail, the visual details on the page. And I keep reassuring them, listen, later, I can help you cut like up to 1K words. I helped this one student cut 1,200 words, or we cut 600 words, but later. So they like kind of have to trust me on this. But I say, I'm going to teach you 4 strategies, and they're really simple for how to navigate, cutting through like what may seem like a big wild landscape of words. So whether it's draft 5 or 10 or whatever, I'm like, okay, now the games begin. And this is an idea of revision being like a sport. A.S. King gets the credit for this. This is a wonderful young adult author who also happens to be my professor right now at Vermont College of Fine Arts program for writing for children and young adults. So if you haven't read her young adult novels, please do. She basically has this concept of she makes it, as a professional author, her own page-by-page game. And she aims to take out, basically she calls it a chainsaw, 20% or more from every page when she's in revision mode. So I explain this to my students, and I'm like, hey, 650 words, that's what we're headed for. You've got 800. Well, all you really have to cut is like 15 words a paragraph. You'll be set. So I try to show them like, here's the goalpost. Here's where we're headed. Let's do the math every time we cut a word and celebrate. So basically what I do is I set up a mini lesson where we practice with somebody else's words, low stakes. And so I set the stage. I'm like, this is what professional authors do. This is why we cut at this point, not earlier. Model and practice with a little mini lesson. I bring up slides. Let's practice together. And then we go to their draft. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to cut from your first couple paragraphs. Watch what I do. And I might have done this before we meet, for example, and I'm cutting words and phrases and lines out. Then I say, you try in the 3rd paragraph. Let's go. You go ahead. I've modeled. Now you try. And then the next time I look at their draft, I'm like, I'll leave them a comment. I bet you can cut 10 words from this paragraph. What do you think? So kind of scaffold it up and see how much they can do. What I'm keeping is authenticity, vulnerability, voice, those things that let a student pop off the page, their persona coming out, that cinematic detail I say that's going to help us see you. The admission officer sees you, the person. So that's what we're trying to keep, make room for. We cut what I call too much sports commentary. That when I was growing up, there was Howard Cosell, who was like had a certain attitude and whine to his voice. And there's commentators I'm sure you hear and you turn them off because you want to just watch the game. Vague, eloquent generalizations that I, as an English teacher, once taught them to do in literary analysis essays, those all got to go because we are trying to make your story and your argument about yourself come out. So here's the first strategy I teach. It's word by word, and it's easy for them to remember. Number 1 is word by word. What word can we cut? So I'll give them a slide like this of somebody else's writing. And this may seem really simplistic, but you can, if you want, you can play along in the chat. and just find one word to cut. That's what my students do with me. And, you know, it's pretty easy to guess that the famous word that, which a lot of us overuse, can be cut. And we celebrate, like, all right, we got rid of one. Okay, that was easy. And then when they realize it's kind of easy, that it doesn't seem so fearsome, that they don't have to just start hacking paragraphs out, but they can start this way. The next one is phrase by phrase. And it's really here is about essential. What is most essential in this phrase? Like, sentence. What phrases could be, you know, expendable? So I want you to look at this. I'm going to read it aloud and think to yourself, what feels like fluff? What feels like extra? And this is one of my students who wrote a great essay about culture and travel. I will tell you, I understand you don't have the full picture. So there's no perfect science, no right answer. And that's what I tell students. I'm like, it's not like I'm sitting here going, there's only 1 or 3 words in the perfect row or order that you have to cut. I want them to feel that there's lots of different possibilities. And I'll show you another example of that. In the 55th minute, with the game deadlocked at 0, South African winger Sipiwe Tshabala fired a rocket of a ball into the top corner of the net to score the first goal of the tournament. A reaction of shock in the crowd quickly turned to joy. So, you know, look at this with the student, ask them, okay, you know, and again, if you're doing this on your own, making up your own slides, ask your students for permission, students who've already, you know, ended up at a school, and say, can I, you know, use a line or two and how we ended up cutting it? And ask the student, so what would you cut? What phrases? I'm going to tell you, I loved this gold that the student had here. I felt like, just look at the fact that the verbs like deadlocked at 0, active verb, high cinematic specificity, the proper name of the player, fired a rocket of a ball, metaphor. That's the kind of stuff I want to keep. And I'm cutting the rest to make room. So this is what we cut. So you go from a long sentence in the 55th minute, shock turned to joy. A nice punchy sentence coming at the end of a long rhythmic sentence that's very visual and easy to follow. So that would be my advice. Now, we don't have the context of the whole essay. You could argue that maybe we want to keep that last sentence long, but there's another place with more fluff. So there's no perfect way to do this. But that got rid of 7 so that we celebrate that. And again, I just want to reiterate, tell your students there's more than one way. I'm not looking for the perfect answer. Let's just talk about it so that, you know, we have this sort of empowerment, that they feel empowered to go off and cut without you standing there.
Right.
Now, another student, I want to do phrase by phrase one more time, because this is a great strategy too, to get a lot of fluff out. Read this with me, and if you feel like in the chat, you can throw out your things that you would cut. One doctor's appointment for my semi-annual scoliosis curve progression check would lead to me being told that I would have to wear, and this sentence ends with, a brace. And one other thing that the student, when she and I were practicing on her own work and she was actually looking for words to cut, she said, oh, I need to replace some words with some shorter ones, right? Like a phrase with just one word. I said, yes, exactly. That's a great editing strategy. And so she already named it. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to add that to my slides as a skill to teach. So she came up with reveal. And this is what we cut. One doctor's appointment for my semi-annual scoliosis check would reveal I would have to wear a brace. Now, I got her permission to share this with other people. And I had other students who did this. And I was like, this is so cool. You saw stuff that I didn't even think about. Like, appointment and scoliosis, that connotes, medical stuff. So we don't need doctors. Why do we need semi-annual? If we need to make room for other gold in her essay, other storytelling gold, then these are good cuts, right? So whether we've cut 7 or 9 words, it's another victory. So again, ultimate goal, make room for gold. And then the next strategy is line by line. So is there a sentence or a full independent clause we could cut? Where have I already said it? Maybe even said it better. So again, this is the same student, and I want you to look for an independent clause or maybe a full sentence that you would cut. When I started wearing my brace in public, most of the people that I knew at school were extremely supportive about my situation, but a few people did not understand. Some people knocked on my brace or whispered and pointed as I walked by. I want to say here real quickly that if we had 1,000 words, then this would be just fine. But because they're 650 and she has to make room for other things that she did in high school besides this story and how she connects this event to other things, we have to cut something, is what we decided. So this is what we cut, because to me, the end is gold. This image just broke my heart when she wrote it, and the people knocking on it, whispering and pointing. And I knew that it had to stay because it just like got me. So a few people did not understand as an independent clause that doesn't really need to be there, you know. And again, had we more words, we could just leave it all in. I think it's great writing. But then other kids found other things too to cut. So 12 are gone from there. So last one, I'm going to wrap this up now. Basically, this could be a whole course on revision and editing, but I want to just leave you with one thought about how you cut ideas. And this is when a student gets off track from their original core values and ideas they want to express about themselves, where they're being either redundant, or they are in repeating main ideas, or they're just off track. So they're wandering and meandering. So Ethan has a thing about log lines that he suggests to people. What screenwriters do when they pitch a movie, they have to get it down to 2 sentences. And he suggests to students that, you know, you create like a log line. It's like a North Star in your essay, the core ideas. So you can ask a student, is this with your North Star? Is this really with your log line? Or are you kind of going off track? So I'll just leave you with this. I had a wonderful student who wrote about losing a friend to suicide. And she wrote a whole thing about how it inspired her after going through this difficult thing to study psychology, and or that's what she wants to do, and work with children. And so because she made this point about how her friend had taken care of her and been so good to her, we were able to cut this line because it was a little bit, it wasn't necessarily off track, but it was already being stated by the gold here. And she wanted to make room for her other point, which was her future in studying psychology. So she kept in the part about the memes he used to send her. Everyone is dressed up and I'm wearing a t-shirt meme. And we got rid of more global, you know, summary lines, like we started to take care of one another. Again, if she had 1,000 words, I probably would have left it in. But these are the kind of things, ideas that she could cut. So I'm going to wrap it up there, stop sharing, and turn it back to Ethan. So.
Awesome. Thank you. I love how specific and how practical you are. It's just my heart, it resonates with with that. Okay, I want to jump into what I call this pharmacist approach. So, what I mean by that, when a student, you know, because we worked with a bunch of students this year, and I had to get, I've had to over the years get pretty good at quickly knowing what to sort of look for, and so I want to share with you like what goes through my head when I'm reading through an essay. And it seems to me when I'm reading an essay, the first question I'm asking is this what I call a narrative or a montage? And so if it's a narrative, that's a challenges-based essay. And if it's not a challenges-based essay, it's a montage. And so I want to share with you 4 questions that I ask. It's kind of like 2 years ago, I was like, could I flow chart this? And so I created a flow chart. And I basically was like I probably looked like a conspiracy theorist, but I had this giant piece of paper out and I was drawing, and then this goes to this and this connects to this. But essentially I put together this thing, and what that thinking became this choose your own adventure essay tool, which maybe some of you have heard about, but probably most of you haven't. This is going to be actually the curriculum for the course that we're teaching starting in a couple of weeks. But one of the resources in here is the one, I'm just going to click into the counselor section here. It's sometimes, again, fun to show folks where things are, because then they know where to get back to it later. But here is what I'm looking for when I'm helping a student. Let's go to improve a draft. So I have a separate thing that I could talk to you about how to help students pick a topic, but just for the sake of time, because we want to talk about working with parents in a few minutes, I want to talk to you about helping students improve a draft. So when I'm reading an essay, if it's a narrative challenges-based essay, the first question that I'm looking for is it clear what the challenges even are? Because sometimes it is and sometimes it ain't. And if it ain't, I got to know what it is. And then if not, or maybe it is clear, sometimes I don't know what the effects of the challenges were on the student. So that's the second thing that I'm looking for. Like, do I get a sense of why this was important? The third question that I'm looking for is it clear what the student did to overcome the challenges? Because you've been there before, right? You see the essay that's like 75% challenges, and then suddenly they're better, right? It's healed, they fixed the thing. And you're like, wait, you like the best part of the movie where you're like doing the montage of like, you know, doing the push-ups and whatever, the boxing thing, the Rocky montage. We need that montage of like all the stuff you did to overcome this challenge, because suddenly you're better. How did it happen? And then, of course, we need something at the end. Ira Glass, talks about this. A great story needs a great narrative. This happened, then this happened, then this happened. And then we need something that lets us know why you were telling this story in the first place. And that's sometimes what we call insights. And Lynn, separate side note, has so much to say about insights. We're talking about maybe doing just a mini course only on like bringing more insight into an essay. But we need to know, what is the so what? Because that's the what I'll call nutritional piece for college admission officers. So they know the skills, qualities, values, interests that you're bringing to the college campus. Now, students might have these some of them, but maybe not in sort of the right proportion. Maybe it's a ton of challenges, or, maybe there's they've done a lot about what they did about it, but just no insight. And so, I encourage students to think about all four of these. And if they can have all four of these in their essay, when I've looked at great challenges-based essays, oftentimes they have all of these. Not always, but oftentimes. And the cool thing about this, which I'll illustrate in just a second, is I can do a quick scan and diagnose which of these sections, which of these questions maybe needs help. And it gives me a specific question that I can ask the student. And then I'll show you in just a minute a resource. I point them to specific resources that I put together on how to actually do that particular thing. For a montage essay, if it's not about a challenge, I want to know at the top, is it clear what the topic even is? And for this, I'll use something what Lynn mentioned called the log line, which is give me a 2-sentence description of name the thing itself that is your whatever central thematic thread, and then what are the values that you want to show in your essay. So for example, if a student is writing about food, which is a somewhat common topic, but and then their log line, a baseline bad log line would be food has taught me a lot about myself. Great, but give me a little more specific. What values? Well, food has connected me more closely to my family. It has helped me connect with my find cool and interesting extracurricular projects, and it's actually led to me finding what I want to do with my life. Cool. So those 3 things now give us 3 paragraphs for the essay. And so students can create a log line at the start, but they could also create a log line mid-process when they're trying to figure out what am I trying to do here? And that log line can help clarify for themselves, okay, here are the pieces of my essay. And you can clarify it in 1 sentence, name the values, and those values will map out the paragraphs. So that's question 1 that I'm looking for. Do I know what the topic even is? 2, are there specific examples for each paragraph? So in the example that I just named, do I see a specific example of food teaching you about something important about your family, or food leading to some cool, interesting extracurricular activity? And then 3rd, is it clear based on my examples what values that I want to show? Again, this is the nutritional part of the essay. What do I mean by nutritional? If they're just fluff examples, what I think we mean by fluff is are there values or not? If I see a thing that's doesn't have a so what that gives me a sense of what that student's going to bring to a college campus, usually I'm cut it or trim it. Do we need it? Because what does this show about you? And some students sometimes might show me 200, 400 words and be oh yeah, this is about me wanting to show my adaptability. And I'm could you do it in 1 sentence? Or what's the essence detail that helps to show that particular value? That's why I love to scan for values. And then finally, do we get that answer to that so what question? So again, as I'm reading through, I'm do I know what the topic is? Do I have the specific examples? Are they connected to values? And is there a so what in there somewhere? And if I'm, again, I based on each of these, I'll just show you real quick. This is a thing that I won't get into right now. This is the moment where I'm I don't have time to get into all these, but I want you to see that there's I have a pharmacy of tools that I'll show you how to get access to it just a little bit. If the challenges and effects, for example, aren't clear, there are specific things, and I've heard Lynn say before, I encourage folks to develop these. If you don't want to use these, you can develop your own. Here, let me give you a specific one. If let's say the student needs to share more about the what I did about it. Let's say they've totally skipped that element. Then there's this resource called Revising the What I Did About It section of your essay. And so in here are 11 ideas for improving the what I did part of your story. So for example, what did you do as a result of or thanks to your challenges? During or after the time you experienced the challenges? Was there a moment that things changed for you? Because that's sometimes an interesting moment in an essay. It could be in the middle. Did you take responsibility for anything you hadn't before? Did you go anywhere that you hadn't before? Maybe physically, geographically, or maybe mentally, you did something that you had never done before. Did you earn money to pay for anything, become more engaged, or take action around a social justice issue or cause, etc.? So this is 11 specific ideas for how students can tackle that particular part of it. So this is kind of a little pharmacy that I put together of here are different, you got this problem, take 2 of these and call me in the morning. And I put together a bunch of these for just basically each of those 4 problems. And I'll share more about that in just a few minutes. But in short, the way that I've kind of tried to codify this is go, what are the things that I'm looking for when I'm reading an essay? And it's actually a really productive. It takes a day to like think through this. But the invitation here is to think through, okay, what are those questions that I'm asking when I read an essay? Because we can actually equip students with those earlier on in the process and say, here are the 4 things that I'm going to be looking for. Here are the 4 questions that I'm going to be asking. Because then they can go back and do the same thing that Lynn's talking about, which is like, begin to teach themselves how to become better writers. So they become their own teachers. And so I'll often equip students with these questions ahead of time and be like, hey, heads up, here are the 4 things that I'm going to be looking for as I look at your essay. So if you want to start to incorporate, content that speaks to these, that would be super awesome. Bring that into your outline, because I think it'll be really helpful. So quick transition back over to you, Lynn, to talk a little bit about working with parents. We didn't even work on segues. It's just like, here are 4 bullet points. So,
we are not modeling essay transitions here, are we? We are.
Speaking of segues, yeah, go.
All right. So tips for working with parents. A lot of folks here probably, you can please add on in the chat your wisdom on this, because I'm going to give you kind of my things that have worked for me. And I want to begin with the interview, which in CEG, whether working there or with my own business, I usually meet with families for at least 20 or 30 minutes. And I'm really curious about past writing experiences, because I want to hear both the parent and the student talk about their relationship to the student's writing. That's always really key to me. So I want to know, hey, how are you with writing? Like, well, have you written anything you're really proud of, you love? Have you done any creative nonfiction, memoir writing, creative writing? Is there something even from like middle school you'd be willing to share with me? I'm looking for gold and anything they might be excited about, but it's okay if there's not. It's also super interesting to hear the parent talk about writing strengths and writing gaps. So I ask both of those questions. And I also ask, so what's your drafting style? How long does it take you to write an essay? Are you a night before person? Do you plan it out? I'm getting a sense of what it's going to take, on my end to provide, services that are commensurate with what they need. And the other thing that I think is really important in working with parents is to really spell out specifically what I'm going to do in terms of process and structure. A week in the life of my services is, one of the things is 2 deadlines a week. And this is something that's been really popular with the families I work with. They know that Wednesdays and Sundays, and I do this also for my schedule because I'm a graduate student at this time, Wednesdays and Sundays are their work days. So this also eliminates a lot of extra conversation of them saying to their child, hey, have you been working on that stuff for Lynn? Because they know that Wednesday night or 4 a.m. on Thursday, maybe, or early Monday morning, they are submitting things to me, and the parent doesn't have to check in as much, and it gives them that distance, which they love. I'm taking notes, by the way, during this interview the whole time as I'm describing my services and saying to the student, do you have 5 to 7 hours a week? Is this going to work for you? Kind of reading the room, how the parent and the student interact and feel about this whole process. A lot of parents tell me, I want distance, I want space from this, and I really want to trust you to this. So that's awesome, because we can do a lot with that. I'm also give them a participation agreement to look over, and then both the student and the parent signs. You're welcome to go to my website and take a look at that, and borrow it if you need it, like that sort of format. My FAQs page basically has lots of more detail on how I handle services with students and the participation agreement. The other way I stay in touch with parents after we've set up all the expectations of hours and deadlines and everything is I'm sending at least 2 to 3 emails a week after a student submits or they don't submit their work. I use a template, and my work with online programs where we were beginning these in the days when nobody knew what it was. So we had to be very clear about what we were offering asynchronously. And I'm doing a lot of feedback in Google Drive and a lot of things. So I'm very clear about, look, I just left you feedback. I left you narrative summary, line edits. Then I give the student action items so everybody's on the same page. I celebrate what's being practiced in terms of skills and any strengths I'm seeing, try to stay super positive, but also saying, hey, I really want to push you in this area. The templates that I have make it super easy to personalize. So I just set up templates of like what I'm sending after Wednesdays and what I'm sending after Sundays. And I have a regular schedule of feedback. I should have fixed this. It should be Thursday, Monday, that they know they're always getting feedback. Parents share access to the drive. In our last session, people were pointing out a really interesting thing, and I really appreciate this, that they don't share essays with parents unless the student has given the permission. I'm just pretty much like, everybody has access to the drive. Parent, should have access because they are paying for it. But one of the great things I learned in working with CEG is that it's very important, if a parent jumps in and starts giving feedback and you hadn't basically agreed that that was going to happen, because in fact, in my participation agreement, I basically say I prefer that you not do that. I definitely approach me. We can talk. I'm willing to communicate, but let's just have this sort of sacred space. But you can, of course, come in and look and see what my comments are and see that I am providing a service. So in the case where, let's say, a parent or the older sister jumps in and starts leaving feedback, that is a great opportunity to turn to the student and say, how do you feel about having these other feedback? I prefer that we not have a lot of different people. We've talked about this, but I just want to check and see how you're feeling. Get the read from the student and in the next live meeting, and then approach the parents. And again, try to reiterate those boundaries that you've set. But sometimes, it is what it is. And I want to accept that. And I appreciate it. The other thing is I do everything through email. I have people's numbers, but I move everything to email because there's a lot of reporting and action items. There's a lot of pointing to Drive. And in Drive, I have mentor essays, I have handouts, I've got slides, I've got the recordings. And so I really want them to use email, because texting is just long conversations like this introvert cannot keep up with, and it's overwhelming to me. But it's also great to just have the documentation all in email. So that's a big thing for me. The last thing I'll leave you with is that I just try to walk in the shoes of parents whenever I'm feeling defensive or worried. I will just try to remember, like, I'm working with this person's baby and they're worried about like what's next. And maybe this baby is not acting so sweet right now at the age of 17 and being kind of grumpy. And I know as a step parent, like what that feels like, of feeling very unappreciated by your stepchild. And so pretty much I just try to remember that what I need to communicate in these emails is reassurance, positivity, refrain from my own defensiveness. It's big, gray, wide open landscape. And that basically, I understand why families might be freaking out sometimes. I know I did during the college essay process. So I'm sure this is a wisdom that a lot of you have already, but I wanted to end on that note. So
I love it. Thank you, Lynn. I so appreciate you. I wanted to shift to Q&A in a minute. I just wanted to, before I do that, just give a quick 2 minutes, take on this course that we're teaching that's coming up really soon. It's called How to Write a Personal Statement, as you might imagine, and it's real different from past courses. So if you've taken my course before, this is going to be different. It starts in 2 weeks, and the main difference I'll just show you is this Choose Your Own Adventure tool. So this is something that I put together a year and a half ago, based on 300 past essays I looked at. And what I looked at was like, how are students writing at their topics in a relatively reliable way? And I realized that there were like 7 particular types of essays that students were writing. And I used those to create a set of brainstorming exercises that lead to these 7 types of essays. And then I realized that I hadn't really done much on how to decide on a topic. So I was like, oh, I should create a thing on that and be able to talk about that. So I put together a sort of a framework around that. And then I created just a bunch more resources around, like, if a student does decide to write, for example, what we'll call like the career style essay, then how do students outline it? And I realized that I hadn't gone real deep in terms of creating outlines. And so on the course, what we're going to do is each week, week 1, we're going to talk about brainstorming. I'm going to share sort of my favorite new exercises, only one of which is the essence objects exercise, but there are 6 others that I find to be really, really useful. And then talk about how those then lead to topics, and in particular, how those lead to great outlines. Because I think that outlines have been the thing that over the last couple of years saves so much time. If we can get on the same page about the outline, it's like, it's the, in screenwriting terms, it's the beat sheet of like, what is the whole thing? And then in week 3, we're going to get into revising. So how do students up-level individual paragraphs and strive for those things like insight? I've got a whole resource here on like 10 ways to bring more insight into the essay. For example, when students are trying to tweak that paragraph, could you think of the opposite? The opposite of what? Well, what was the thing that you thought the reader probably thought you were going to say? And then how do you flip that upside down? So instead of saying, I learned my body is capable of more than I'd originally thought, which, yeah, kind of typical insight. Maybe you learned you've been pushing your body too hard and you actually needed more rest than you knew. So we see a new value of like rest or self-care or something like that. And so I actually sat down with Andy, who's on my team, and we looked at basically great essays. Almost all the stuff that we put together is like looking at great essays and going, what did the student do that really worked? And how do we kind of reverse engineer that and create a resource around it? So related to that, we did, put together a resource called How to Write a Great Transition Sentence. And first, why are good transitions even important? And then, the big thing is like building trust with the reader. But we basically, show how, here are 9 different kinds of transitions. So students are struggling with that. And then we get into things like, how do you end the personal statement? What do you do about polishing and grammar? And so this basically creates the curriculum that we'll walk through on the course. And, we do these in like 90-minute sessions. There's one for one-on-one, which is probably more useful for this group. And then we're doing one for large groups. So if you're a counselor with a medium to large caseload, we're going to talk specifically about working in the school environment, creating workshops. How do you create peer review systems? And then the new thing we're adding this year by request is the opportunity for counselors to write their own personal statement in like a writing group, small cohort. So Lynn's going to be leading one of those, a couple of those cohorts, and we're opening up 40 spots for those. And it's totally optional. If you don't have time for it, we get it. But I've found that as counselors, like as we work through this and we're trying to sort of try some of these things on, a great way to embody them, incorporate them, is to actually try the things. But that's a totally optional part of it. The minimum ask for the course is just to show up to these live 90-minute sessions if you can watch the recording if you want. There's optional homework. All the homework's optional. And then if you want to join for one of these writing groups, which meet once a week for 4 weeks for an hour, awesome. So that's the course, and we'd love to see some of you all there. And we said that I said this on the morning session, but if we're gonna we'll email you out about this. But if folks sign up in the next couple of days, like say by Friday, we'll send you a free book. So, and we'll email details on how to do that. So a couple of awesome questions came in, and I want to just open up and invite y'all's questions for the next couple of minutes. The first one was, it was back to the brave and interesting questions one. Do these brave and interesting questions act as an icebreaker, or could they also be used as a possible topic generator? If so, could you share an example of a topic that came up from a question? So just to rewind 40 minutes or so. Yeah, an example of one of these questions that turned into one of the questions on this 100 brave and interesting questions list was a specific one about what weapon would you carry during the zombie apocalypse? And there was a student we worked with 2 years ago who was like, ooh, I kind of like that question. And so what she ended up doing is kind of combining a method that we call like the superpowers exercise with the zombie apocalypse. And she shared through a montage all the different skills that she's developed in her life that would be useful in a zombie apocalypse. And then each one of those skills has been useful in other areas in her life. For example, on her volleyball team, and when she was volunteering at the library, you can kind of see how that goes. So it was kind of like a superpowers essay. Here are all these skills that I've developed, and it was connected back to her main topic of like, and also that would be useful in the zombie apocalypse. So that's one example of that. The main thing I want to say about this vulnerability loop thing is like, as I'm scanning through those questions, I'm also scanning myself to be like, where am I at? Because there's like level 1 to level 10 vulnerability possible here. And like with Lynn, I think I was probably like, kind of in like the 5 to 7 range of like how vulnerable I wanted to be. And that's going to change from day to day. But what I would say, like in terms of like, which questions should we ask, is like, do the thing that I think we do is like, we just kind of scan, what am I looking for? And also it's kind of dependent on the student. We're kind of reading them to go like, what level question? And I'm also, again, making myself vulnerable and going, what weapon would I carry in the zombie apocalypse? And I don't do too much of that, but I do enough of it so that it feels a little more balanced and not just like I'm asking them to be vulnerable.
Hey, Ethan, there's a question. Are you putting out a new book with your new curriculum in the Q&A?
Yeah, I probably am going to keep it in this course. We'll see. But I think that like the course is probably the best way to do it. We'll see, maybe someday, but like for now, it's only in the course. So TBA. Sarah asked a beautiful question privately, which is I just love, and I'm going to like cook on this question some more. Sarah, I just want you to know The question is, how do you know to ask them these 4 questions? So the 4 questions that I shared about montage and narrative. And what I would say to that is like, it's not like these were like given to me in a dream or like I brought them down from the mountaintop. It was like, I think when I think about, for example, a challenges-based essay, and I think about what goes into a great one, and I go, okay, I know we need some kind of like a good story, and I know we need like a so what, because that's what colleges need to know. So this is going to keep folks interested, and this is going to give the content that's needed for the college application process. And then for the first part of the story, if it is a challenge, I need to know what the challenge was, and I need to know what you did about it, and then I need to know what you learned. So those shaped 3 of those questions. And those were the initial 3 questions that I was asking students. And so the reason and this is kind of like reverse engineering from, just sort of basic storytelling structure, creating those questions. But then I realized that sometimes I was missing some additional context about what the challenge meant to them. So I added that 4th question about how did it impact you? So that's on the challenges side. And then on the montage side, essentially, what are we trying to do? We're trying to help a student share skills, qualities, values, and interests that they're going to bring with them to a college campus. And so what do we need for that? Well, we need a bunch of skills, qualities, values, and interests. So what are those values? Okay, well, if we're going to show those values, we can't just be like, oh, I'm hardworking and I'm adaptable. We need examples to show those. Okay, and once we've got some examples of these values, we also need something to connect them, like a thematic thread. And so there you can hear the questions, right? It's like the 3rd question is like, what are those values? 2, what are those examples that are going to show me those values so that it's an interesting story? And then the first one is like, what's going to connect all of them? So it's not just like, here's some random things about me, which, you've seen probably essays that are like, here's some random facts about me, but we need that thematic thread to connect them. And that's what I call the topic. And then again, working from that structure of like, what goes into a great story, the details, the gold, as Lynn calls it, and then the so what. And so I think that 4th question is like, so what does this mean? What's the insight? And that leads me to the 4th question. I don't know if that's a very satisfying answer to you, Sarah, but that's sort of like the way that I've reverse engineered this. And it could be that these questions are subject to change. I could come up with like a new set of questions or something. But what I would say is like over the last few years, as I've tested these tend to be good questions when I specifically ask them that improve the essay. And it's hard to like measure like what does an improved essay mean, and it's based on my own biases. But these tend to be pretty good ones in terms of helping students generate more content that's going to help them show themselves off in the college application process. We're at time, but is there one more question? Do you see others? Lynn?
There's one about your course in the Q&A. I think you explained it earlier. What is the course associated with the Choose Your Own Adventure tool? Is it its own separate course or included?
Yeah, totally. So it's included. That's included in the course that I mentioned. So this course that I mentioned, Katie, the personal statement one, and we'll follow up via email with more. But that's the course that uses the Choose Your Own Adventure tool as its curriculum. In the past, when I've taught this same course on individual, I had like separate stuff from my old book, from college, my old book 5 years ago, College Essay Essentials. And I'm basically moving over the curriculum to this new content that I developed over the past couple of years. So that's how it's different. And people are asking like, hey, can I use this with my students? And the answer is yes, eventually, but I need to talk to people on the course to figure out how do I charge for it? Because I don't actually know how much I should charge for it. So that's one of the things that we're going to be in like, in dialogue about is I'm literally going to ask per course participants is like, how much should I charge for this? How much would folks pay? And based on that input, then I'll decide here's how much I will charge. But I'll probably only let folks who take the course, use it with students, because then they'll know how to use it and stuff. Mm-hmm. All right. We're out of time. We're over time. But Lynn, thank you. I love
my pleasure.
hanging out with you and working with you. And
me too.
Yeah, we'll follow up by email to everybody with resources and all the things. And hope to see some of y'all in a couple weeks. Much love. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you. Bye.